On today's show, I'm talking to Lighter Capital client Stephen Monterroso, who is the CEO of ShareVault. Welcome to Bootstrapped, the lighter side, the podcast for B2B startup founders wanting to achieve success without giving up ownership or control. This podcast is brought to you by Lighter Capital, the leader in founder-friendly financing for B2B SaaS companies. Learn more at lightercapital.com. Okay, we are so happy to be here today with Steve Monterroso, CEO of ShareVault. Welcome, Steve.
Yes, thank you for having me.
You have such a fantastic origin story. In 2008 or 2009, you had to completely shift careers. I'd love you to share that with us.
Yeah, it's not the first time, but I won't go too far back. We'll start from 2008. So prior to that, I was an investor in real estate. Long story short, 2008 happened, and we all know what happened in 2008.
Yeah.
So I went knocking on doors and had to kind of change careers and change direction. And that's when I got into tech. And so when I got into tech, I started with a company called 8x8. They weren't too big at the time, but they were poised for some growth. They were voice over IP. They're a telecommunications type company. I started at the bottom. I mean, I started in a call center making cold calls, warm calls. And so that's been my start in tech. And then from there, I didn't skip a rung. I went into team lead, supervisor, manager, director, VP. I've been at smaller companies. I've been at larger companies. I've been at Fortune 100 companies. But through this whole process, I always knew my end goal was to get into the C-suite. And so here we are today. And so I worked my way through the different channels. I bounced through marketing, through sales, operations. I've kind of touched on every department.
Right. And a great transition that I know has been really successful. What I want to go into, because you've had every sales role from the lowest level to, now running the company, which I always say a CEO is a sales role because you're selling to investors, potential customers, and future employees.
Exactly.
Talk about the time to transition from founder-led sales, because I know you've been there and you've seen that a few times. So at Lighter Capital, we see this as something that is often a challenge for our companies. The founder does the sales, they do a great job, and then they hit a certain inflection point where it's time to bring on, your first sales hire.
And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's what is that inflection point? There's really no secret timeline to when you do it. The way I look at it, it's when a founder starts to become the bottleneck to growth. That's then where they need to start resourcing and staffing their first sales hire. The other component is you want to make sure that as a founder, you've identified your customer profile, you have enough guidance that you can give to that new salesperson that you're going to bring in a winning recipe, right? That they can execute against. And so I feel like those two things combined typically signal to a founder when it's time to bring in that salesperson.
I was a VC for a couple decades, and more often than not, founders would get this wrong their first or second time. And I almost just got accustomed to, okay, you're going to go through one or two, maybe more sales hires before you find the right one. And that's a big waste of time, money, it delays everything, a distraction. What can founders do to get it right on that first hire?
No, and it's a super important role because it is one of the most expensive roles that you're going to hire for. And it's really going to determine how your story unfolds as you start to scale and as you start to grow. What I've found is don't rush it. You don't want to be the bottleneck, but you also don't want to rush into your hire. You want to make sure you find the right person. That person's going to need to align with your culture. They're going to need to align with you and your communication patterns, right? They're going to need to align around the vision. And you want to make sure that they're going to align around the size of company. That's where I see a lot of founders get this wrong. They're like, okay, let's go get the best salesperson we can find. Let's go source them from Salesforce. Let's go get them from Oracle. That's not the same person that you want in a startup. A startup is just too different, right? Selling a product that has a brand and its awareness where people take your phone call is very different than selling something no one has any idea who you are, what you're doing, right? It's a different breed of a person that's going to be able to do that. And so I would say, don't chase the guys that are at the larger enterprise companies. Find the right fitted people who've been there, who have done that within a startup. I would also say, make sure you clearly identify the person that you're looking for. What I've always found in the earlier stages, you don't want to go too green and you don't want too senior. You want to try to find that player coach, right? Someone who can do the job, who can document it, who can put together the processes, who's already started to assemble teams before, who's hungry, right? That typically is the right person. And they need to be able to wear multiple hats. Sometimes it might be marketing, sometimes it might be sales, a mix of management, leadership, being able to collaborate, communicate internally. Those are all things that you need to get. And typically, you don't get that from someone who's earlier in their career. And you get too much of some of it in the later career. So you want to catch them at that perfect player coach spot.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. It really mirrors my experience where oftentimes, especially once a company gets funding, whether they're taking it from lighter capital or a venture firm, they tend to, I would say, almost overhire for that first sales role. And they're hiring somebody who wants to put together a team and not really do the sales themselves. And that's often when it's really expensive, that it often doesn't work. So finding that person that can move into that leadership position, but also, be the good for first sales hire is tricky.
And I learned that the hard way. I was at a small startup. I was like, okay, we got to get the best guy we can find, pay him top dollar from one of the best companies. And we got that guy in. And yes, his Rolodex worked for the first month. And then after that, it was downhill, right? They didn't know how to cold call. They were above it or they saw themselves above it. They weren't willing to wear the multiple hats. And when you're early, there's so many constant changes that you got to adapt to. That's the type of person you need someone who's going to be able to adapt and communicate and collaborate with different teams.
So ShareVault, the company that you're currently running, has been a lighter capital portfolio multiple times, and we're so grateful for that. But let's talk about a little bit about the company and your experience there because it's unique.
Yeah, no, ShareVault's a deal enablement platform. So the example I'll give, if you're ready to go raise capital or if you're looking to merge or get acquired, there's documents that are shared in that process. We're the behind the scenes where those documents get shared with third parties, right? Between buyer and seller. We allow you to organize those documents in a structured manner that's going to signal out to the world, I'm deal ready. I know what I'm doing. I'm professional. I'm buttoned up, which is a key indicator, right? To maximize your valuation. And then obviously signals, hey, we're secure. We care about our IP. So that's what ShareVault does. It's known as a virtual data room. That's the industry term for what we do. I don't care for the term. I like to say deal enablement platform because really we're focused on how do we accelerate the due diligence process? How do we get you a higher multiplier by leveraging our analytics, things like that. So that's the world we live and breathe in. So all things merger and acquisitions. I also have my own podcast, which is called This is M&A. It's because we're so focused on the merger, the acquisitions, the fundraising, or any document that you just can't assign a dollar amount to. That's where ShareVault comes into the equation. And we took on the capital as growth capital. We didn't want to dilute our shareholders. We thought the best path forward was to work with lighter capital. We're now deploying that cash. What we're doing now is we're kind of rebuilding our foundation so that we continue to scale and grow. So we're improving some of our marketing systems, mostly our sales systems, up leveling our brand a little bit. Brands do get dusty after 10, 15 years. And so we thought it would be good to kind of dust it off and improve the logo, things like that. So we're deploying the capital mainly for growth purposes.
Okay, and I'd love you to talk about your how you got involved in ShareVault because you're not the founder, but you're running the company now.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I'm not the founder. I would say I'm the refounder. You're right. I was brought in to kind of
I don't think I've ever heard that. That's good. Refounder.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
refounding
think
the
I'm a
company,
refounder too. Yeah, I like
yeah,
that.
there you go. I was brought in to transform the business, and then that's what we're working towards. How did I hear about ShareVault? Let's see. About 9 years ago, I was about to take a gap year, I guess you would call it. I was ready to just kind of take the family and just travel.
Because you had had a previous success, so you had some,
Yeah, yeah,
you had earned some downtime.
yeah. And I've been at it for quite some time, so I definitely earned it. In the 20 years, I was going to take the year off and travel, and a board member got wind of it and said, "Hey, would you think about doing some consulting?" Right? And I was like, "Nah, I want to take a full year off." He's just take a couple meetings. I really want you to meet this company. And so I met the company and we got to some discussions. It started off more as a consulting thing. I was like, okay, I'll consult for a little while. And then after the consulting was completed, they're like, we got to get you in here. We got to get you in. We need a CRO. We need someone who's going to help us with sales, marketing, biz dev, corp dev, all of those things. So that's where my role started here at ShareVault, was taking care of those departments, and then slowly transitioned into the CEO role about 8 months ago, 9 months ago. Now we're kind of in this transformational stage, which I mentioned. Now we're kind of looking for that typical hockey stick growth that you hear everybody talk about.
There's a couple things to dig into there. First is moving into the CEO role when you're not the founder. That can be tricky when there are still founders around, but how have you navigated that? Because it seems to be working very well.
Yeah, it's definitely tricky. If I could give any founder or refounder advice,
A refounder, I think you should trademark that.
coin
That's
that,
just
I would just say inspect, inspect, inspect. Get in, inspect everything, take inventory, know where you're at, build a plan, know where you need to go, and then start to execute. Don't just jump in and start to execute. Clean up the house. For me, cleaning up the house was the cap table, making sure the cap table was accurate. We had all the right documentations. It was all of our corporate governance. It was our finances, knowing what's coming in, what's going out. We did a huge, huge reduction in expenses just through going through and just saying, need this, don't need this. Take inventory of your people, get a good sense of who they are, how they want to be managed, because there's a huge culture aspect. And I would also say, don't just jump in and think you're going to change the culture right away, especially if you're a refounder. There's already been a culture that's been developed. And so you got to be delicate to that. But as a founder, a refounder, you do have to change the culture if the culture doesn't align with the culture you're trying to drive towards. But there's a process behind that. And you got to roll that out slowly, because if you go too fast, you start to lose good people. And that's one thing you don't want to do, is lose great people. And then aside from that, it's planning. The first couple months, it was, even though I had already been at the company, I sat inside of a Word document. I did my SWOT analysis. I did all the research I needed, put together the playbook, laid everything out, got my leadership team together, made sure they were bought in on the plan, had them help me develop the plan, right? And then we started the execution part. And the execution for us, we found, was, let's rebuild the foundation and let's make ourselves more operationally excellent so that we can go out to market a lot faster than we ever did before, because that's what we need. We need momentum. And we found some cogs in the wheel with some of the systems we're using that were preventing us from being able to get the momentum we wanted. So, and that's where, again, where lighter capital came into the equation.
Well, let's go back to something you mentioned earlier. When you came into ShareVault, it was really as the CRO, not the head of sales, not the head of marketing, but really to run both. Because the CRO is a relatively new role, or the name, 20 years ago, I don't think that existed as a title. When does a company decide they need a CRO versus, a VP of sales and VP of marketing?
Let me take a step back. So I did come in as head of sales, but we had the agreement that it was to move me into the CRO role sooner than later. But again, it was to kind of transition so it didn't shock the culture and shock the company. So that was the intent and by design. So then I moved into the CRO role. I would say, when does that make sense? If I were to put a dollar amount to it, it's probably somewhere between 5 and 10 million. But I think more important than the dollar amount, it's when you start to see within your org that you have multiple revenue streams or responsibilities for driving revenue. So you have a marketing team, you have a business development team, you have a sales development team, you have a customer success team, a renewals team. When you start getting to that point where you have all these different teams, what naturally starts to happen is, if you don't have someone at the helm overlooking all of those and singing from the same sheet, what ends up happening, you have these silos. So I think what's more important than a dollar amount range is, it's when you start to identify that silos are happening or there's friction between those departments, that's a clear signal you might be ready for a CRO. I generally say you want to get one in sooner than later, because a good CRO, one who has operations experience, one who has real hands-on marketing experience, real hands-on sales experience, they're going to be able to rally the team to row the same direction and to work towards the right results. If you ask a marketing person and you ask a salesperson and you ask a customer success person, all of those people independently working in silos might give you a different answer on what's the main objective. A good CRO is going to rope all of that together so everybody knows what the main objectives are.
Would you bring a CRO in as your first sales and marketing hire? Would you say, let's just start from the top? We'll bring in a CRO who can look at both and manage both and see where we need to staff resources in each area.
I've never thought about that. But that would be a bit tricky, because now you're bringing in someone who If they're a CRO, they've likely have already been a VP or at least a director. And so they're used to directing
Yeah.
team leads.
Having a lot of resources, right?
Exactly. Having a lot of resources. So putting them back into an environment where they're now having to get scrappy. And there's folks out there. I'm one of them. Yeah. The title means absolutely nothing. I could jump in and get scrappy if I need to, but you don't run across a lot of those that are in the CRO role. And it's an expensive role, right? Now you're spending
Yeah.
way more than you have to. And the responsibilities aren't quite there yet for that role. So I would say you definitely want to wait till you hit that spot where you got a couple of those other hires already in place.
Let's talk about some of the tools that you have found helpful and are finding helpful because they're changing rapidly for building a sales and marketing organization.
Yeah. So for the past 7 months, I haven't been thinking marketing and sales nearly as much as company as a whole. So I may not be in tune with all the new cool tools out there. I'm sure there's a lot
Yeah.
of AI tools, but I am familiar with some of the ones we use. Definitely, you got to have a CRM. You got to start with the CRM right out the gate. The CRM is just so critical in understanding the process behind winning your customers, right? Especially as a founder, if you're trying to replicate that and then you're going to go tell another salesperson to do it, nothing signals better than saying, hey, I have it all documented. Everything's in Salesforce or whatever CRM you choose. And then I would say, as you start to grow out your sales team, you're going to want a sales enablement platform. We've used FrontSpin, we've used LinkedIn Navigator, we've used a lot of the industry best practice kind of sales tools. And then you're going to want some sort of database that you can pull in contacts from, right? Get phone numbers, email addresses. We've used PitchBook, Zoom Info. And then you're definitely going to need something like what we're on today, a Zoom. Then on the marketing side, I mean, that tool stack is huge. I can go for days talking about all the marketing tools that you need. It depends on what your marketing channels are, whether it's you're doing SEO, paid search. We use HubSpot on the back end for our marketing automation. We use WordPress for our website. We're really big on SEO and making sure that our rankings. So we do a ton of blogging. So we got a bunch of AI tools that we use for blogging. We use SEMrush for kind of keyword search and whatnot. There's a long laundry list of tools that you can use on the marketing tool stack.
What are you using for your CRM?
For our CRM, we use Salesforce.
Okay, so you're using Salesforce and HubSpot separately. Okay.
Exactly. I'm a creature of habit. I've been a Salesforce customer since day one. And so
Yeah.
it's what I'm most familiar with. I could administrate it. So it's been hard. I've tried to make changes to other systems and it just never worked out. Salesforce kept roping me back in.
Yeah, I remember the first time I implemented Salesforce, it was like $15 per user per month. So things have changed.
At a zero to
Yeah.
end of that now
Yeah,
per
exactly.
month.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about your funding journey because ShareVault has been primarily bootstrapped
We have.
and the company has achieved great things. You've grown tremendously without taking outside capital. Was that a deliberate decision from the beginning, or did the company try to raise from venture? And 99% of companies that try to raise from venture aren't successful. So they decide to go down the non-dilutive path because it was the only option open, or was that something that they wanted to do from the get-go?
I believe they tried in the past and then they realized quickly that that wasn't the direction they wanted to go. And so they kind of stuck on this bootstrapped mentality and done a great job. And we've been resilient through the
Yeah.
pandemic, through many things, right? And we managed to build a great business. I think now the trajectory that we're trying to grow is more of that hockey stick. So now we're actually exploring raising some capital that's going to help us get to that next leg of the race. So we are actually exploring raising capital more the equity path. And so things have shifted a little bit. Now we're like, okay, we know if we can raise X amount that we can get to X in revenue, which gives us much better multipliers. And so that's kind of the path we're taking at the moment. We're doing it smart. Now we're focused on EBITDA, right? Making sure that we stay EBITDA positive. So we're not trying to just grow like this and burn through a bunch of cash. We're doing it smart where we're going to be EBITDA positive as we do it. So we're really trying to build a rule of 40 company as our minimum standard.
All right. So you have worked in a bunch of different cultures, Steve. I'd love to get your feedback on how to build a strong culture for growth.
To build a strong culture, it starts with mapping it out. I've done many different exercises at different companies. One of the most funner exercises that I've enjoyed, but I think the employees enjoyed as well, especially when you're in a culture that's already there, is we kind of took a whiteboard, gave everybody sticky pads, and said, hey, go define what you think our culture is today, and then let them go put those sticky pads up, right? So they put their little sticky notes up. And then what we did is we tried to find themes that helped frame where they thought the culture was. And then as we were building our culture, we aligned around that, right, to some extent. Now, naturally, there's going to be things that are part of cultures. If you're trying to transform or trying to turn a company around, that may not align with your methodology and where you want to go from a culture standpoint. And so you got to be delicate to how you segment those and how you work around those. And the way you do that is you build a plan. And that's what we did here at ShareVault. So when I moved into the CEO role, what I did was I built out what's called a ShareVault identity document, right? It lays out what our vision is, what our mission is, what our values are, what's our why. Why are we even in existence? Well, a lot of our employees didn't know why we were in existence, right? And what benefit does that bring to both our employees internally, right? But also to our customers, right? What does it mean to those folks? So I think just as you're mapping things out, which is the key, is to map out the culture that you're trying to drive and then figure out how you infuse that first in your leadership and then from your leadership in down to your staff. I'm sure there's plenty of HR or chief people officers that are by far better than I am at building out and mapping that out. But I think the key is just to take inventory again of what the culture is, where you want it to go. The hard part about culture is there are people that are going to appreciate, adapt, and move forward with that new culture that you're trying to put in front of them. And then there's some that aren't. And the ones that aren't, it's not that they're wrong or they're bad or anything like that. Sometimes companies cross what I call a chasm, and the people that were there in the earlier stages were great for the earlier stages. That's what they were great at. But once you cross a chasm, right, that may not be them. Just like myself, I know once I get to 250 employees, that's not me. I actually go knocking on the boss's door and say, hey, I'm done. Like 250 employees.
250 is your number, huh?
That's my number, right? The politics become too crazy. It's hard to get things over the line. It has its own problems. And for me, I like wearing multiple hats. I like instant gratification of what we're doing, right? And it's not to say that I'm not good at what I do. It's just I just know my lane and I stay in my lane. And there's people like that. And sometimes you're doing them the benefit by saying, hey, this is our lane that we're going now. And they see it doesn't align and they go on and do something better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of our lighter capital portfolio company CEOs who I hosted on a podcast a while ago, he said something that's really stuck with me. And that is, he said, people talk about not having enough time, but what they really don't have is enough energy. And it really resonated because I know, when I'm feeling energetic, I'm 10 times as productive. And, when you're not, when your energy levels are low or your motivation is low, it's hard to get anything done. So what do you do to recharge?
I'll give a prime example. We got a recharge day on Friday. I give my team a recharge day. So, we're going into a 3-day holiday already. I said, let's give them the day before. Let's really get these guys to recharge. And when I recharge, I mean, I'm off grid. It is 100%
Yeah.
family time. I'm going and doing the things that I love to do. And I encourage my employees to do the same.
So it's turning off.
It's so important to turn off. There's different ways you could look at it. I'm one of those folks that like when I'm present and I'm working long hours, I'm doing, I'm hustling, right? But when it comes to like my weekend has to be my weekend because if it's not, what am I working for, right? I think work-life balance is hard. I know everybody talks about work-life balance. I don't know what your experience is, but my work-life balance has never been more life at home. My balance has always been work, always offsetting. It's like higher up. So, and that's just because things are always getting thrown at you, right? And so I've always made it at least a point on the weekends to just disconnect, enjoy the family. It's not really downtime. It's like time with the family, time doing the sports, the activities, the things that I like to do.
So really turning off, shutting down. Yeah. At Lighter Capital, we have like a lot of tech companies in the US have, we have unlimited vacation. And what I found when I came in to lead the company 5 years ago is that what that meant is a lot of people didn't take vacation. And when they did, they were on. And after living in Australia for a while, where, there really is a culture of turning off. And I think I grew to appreciate that living here and appreciate how that does recharge and makes you actually happier and a better contributor to the company. But what we did is we said, okay, we are going to pay a $500 bonus not a huge amount, but to people who take a week and don't check their email during the week. If they check their email once, they don't get the bonus. The idea is, or Slack or anything, we'll text you if there's an emergency, but we want you to turn off, and we'll celebrate you turning off. And so, and I think that's made a difference.
I love ideas like that, getting creative with motivating them to do that. I mean, I think it's so important for people to really shut off. And I've had employees, I try to build relationships with everybody where they could come to me and say, "Hey, I'm burnt. I need time off." And it's like, "Hey, go." Or if someone calls me and says something's going on with family, it's like, family first, go. That's my model. We're trying to work our way into being able to be more creative through some financial incentives to do things. I've also even played with the idea of moving us to an unlimited PTO, but there's pros and cons to it. And one of the cons actually is that employees are less likely to take PTO when you give them unlimited PTO.
Right.
That was something my HR person brought to me. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Because I was so gung-ho about it. I was like, every company I've ever been at, I've always had unlimited PTO. We only have, 3 weeks or whatever it is. I was like, we got to change that. And she's like, well, hold on. Everybody's going the opposite direction. They're moving away from the unlimited PTO back to limiting it because it encourages them to take the PTO.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's company benefits, right? When you move to unlimited PTO, you don't have PTO sitting on the balance sheet, right?
Right.
But we've even toyed with the idea of maybe even finding maybe at some point where some of our slower times are to enforce taking time off, not because we have to, but because we want people to take time off. Yeah. So we're trying to get creative ourselves as well on our end.
I think a book that really influenced me on culture was Reed Hastings, the founder of Netflix. His book called No Rules Rules, and I'd recommend that to anybody, any company leader.
Oh, definitely. Speaking of books, just because we are talking about culture, one of the important things I had to do with culture is making sure you set the right strategy. And I talked about momentum building and rowing in the same direction. There's a book called Turning the Flywheel. What's so great about this book is, a lot of founders think it has to be like this breakout thing that you do that is going to help unlock revenue, right? Like you got to have this, and it's great if you're a unicorn and you can do that. If you're the NVIDIAs of the world, right? Kudos to you. But I could tell you there's a lot more companies that aren't unicorns, and what they have to do is build a flywheel. So the flywheel methodology is you want to basically build momentum doing a lot of the right things and making sure that everybody in the company is rowing at the same speed, at the same rhythm, right? And that slowly starts to build momentum. So the flywheel starts to turn. And then eventually the flywheel gets so much momentum that you can't stop it. And that becomes that hockey stick that you're looking for, right? That's what ShareVault's doing, right? We're not trying to come out with that one groundbreaking thing. We're just doing a lot of great things to build that momentum, and we're doing it succinctly together.
That's Turning the Flywheel by Jim Collins, who also wrote Built to Last and Good to Great.
Yep.
So he's a fantastic author for startup founders and leaders.
All great books. Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Stephen, for joining us today. It was great to hear about your journey and hear about how you've created success at ShareVault.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks again to Stephen for joining our podcast today. And to learn more about ShareVault, visit sharevault.com. That's ShareVault.com. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Bootstrapped, the Lighter Side. To receive future episodes, subscribe using your favorite podcast platform. And if you enjoy this show, please share it with other fellow founders and entrepreneurs. For more insights, helpful tips, and to learn more about founder-friendly financing options, visit us at lightercapital.com. That's LIGHTERCAPITAL.com.